So are you more of a dour and methodical Iron Warrior, a blood-crazed World Eater, or a sinister and scheming Thousand Sons Sorcerer? Let's talk through the Chaos Legions in Warhammer 40K. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Chaos once more, and in this video I thought we'd talk through the Legions of the Dark Gods, touching on a little bit of the character of each of them, what miniatures they have to represent them, and how they stack up in game at the moment, whether it's with themed detachments, their own codexes or indexes, or any unique models and characters. We'll talk through the major Legions of Chaos first, and then focus on a few of the more interesting Renegade Warbands or followers of minor deities. There's quite a lot of flavours of Chaos that you can pledge yourself to if you are a Heretic Astartes. First up, we've got Horus's former legion in the Black Legion. They're the 16th Legion of Chaos Space Marines and were formerly the Lunar Wolves and then the Sons of Horus beforehand. They swapped their tealish armour plate for black post-heresy. Their Primarch is the War Master himself, Horus Lupercal, and the Black Legion, due to its heritage, are pretty much the first amongst traitors, a unified and resolute force of militaristic Black Crusaders, highly trained and drilled in the manners of the legions of old, and fully focused on delivering practical victory against the Imperium, constantly warring against them to destroy terror and cast down the false emperor. They're an undivided legion of Chaos Space Marines, with many Marines pledged to one of the deities or Chaos Undivided, and out of the more core Chaos Legions in Warhammer 40k that aren't more deity specific, they're a bit better represented in kits than most, having both Abaddon the Despoiler and Harkon Worldclaimer. Many of the other legions get some representation from their Horus Heresy ranges, and I guess the Black Legion do have a fair representation amongst them. They do tend to be painted differently in those ranges though, as Sons of Horus, as opposed to in their iconic black and gold that they have in 40k, which is the paint scheme of the majority of Chaos Space Marines that you see on box art. I think both Abaddon and Harkon Worldclaimer are pretty nice models in their own right. Abaddon is pretty much one of the principal bad guys of Warhammer 40k. His Black Crusades, having shattered the Eye of Terror and carved the Cicatrix Maledictum across the galaxy, he fights with Dracnian and the Talon of Horus, and is generally considered to be a particularly well-liked miniature in the 40k range. Harkon Worldclaimer I think is pretty cool as well, a Raptor Lord who plants his spear in the ground of a world to be taken for the War Master and won't rest until he achieves victory. Gameplay-wise, in the recent Chaos Space Marine Codex, their themed attachment is the Veterans of the Long War, a big focal damage boost as its core rule, kind of the dark mirror of the Space Marine Oath of Moment, plus some nice movement and damage boosts beyond that. Otherwise, they tend to be well known for favouring just some of the core Chaos Space Marine choices, things like Legionaries, Chosen, and Terminators, doing the elite of the army better than most. Though as a legion with a massive amount of arms and armoury, they'll be able to use most Chaos assets. Abaddon himself is certainly no slouch either. He can be a powerful centerpiece with his big hit rerolls, particularly nice alongside any sort of Chaos Space Marine firepower, and he should have a good chance of utterly destroying anything he can touch. Overall, between their character access and their themed attachment, I feel like the Black Legion are in a pretty good place at the moment, fairly strong overall. The Veterans detachment definitely has some useful stuff. Next up, we've got the Twisted Legion of Slaanesh in the Emperor's Children, the 3rd Legion of Chaos Space Marines, and gene sons of their Primarch Fulgrim. With the twisting of the machinations of the Dark Prince, the Legion is dedicated to excess, pleasure, sensation, and martial excellence, many warriors having bionic augmentations to their eyes and box grills, taking in every sensation, dosing themselves up to the max with exotic combat drugs, and take pride in dueling the champions of the enemy and laying them low, while clearing out hordes of the rank and file with the blistering sonic weapons. Currently for unique miniatures, they still have an old resin Noise Marine upgrade pack that's still available to them, designed to be combined with Legionaries to represent their sonic weapons and upgrade them to Noise Marines. The kit isn't particularly well done, to be honest, and hasn't been a particularly good pickup in a while, I'd say, though it does seem that light might be eventually at the end of the tunnel in 10th edition, as they're billed to be getting a new codex release and a whole new miniature range, hopefully later in the edition, though Games Workshop haven't officially come out and said so just yet. Lucius the Eternal's 40k miniature is no longer on sale, but there is still this option from the Heresy era version of him, which I think is a pretty nice sculpt, and there's some other pretty fun miniatures out there as well for the Emperor's Children, including some Praetors and Terminators. Currently at time of recording, they're a bit in limbo rules-wise. In the next few weeks they should be getting a digital index to download with Noise Marines and Lucius represented in that. That will go alongside Codex Chaos Space Marines up until the point that their Emperor's Children book will be released. That should bring them far more interesting options and representation with their Primarch and some likely new units beyond the standard, but I certainly expect that a new Fulgrim and Noise Marines will come out. potentially alongside some revamped datasheets for them. Otherwise, they tend to make some good use of close combat focused Space Marines, and Noise Marines aren't bad in terms of firepower, often being fairly efficient with small squads and Blastmasters. Despite this, with their limitations and not so much extra to boost them, plus no themed detachment, it looks like they'll likely be weak until their Codex gets released. Definitely a legion to watch this space with. From Slaanesh to their bitter rival Khorne. Next up, we've got the hyper-violent World Eaters. In the Heresy, these were the Emperor's rabid shock troops, the 12th Legion of Chaos Space Marines, led by Primarch Angron. The Legion implanted with the sinister devices known as the Butcher's Nails, hardening aggression to the point of madness, but also giving them great physical strength, and there are very few enemies that can stand a charge against the Khorne Berserkers of the World Eaters, such as the powerful blows of their chain axes, and insatiable blood-crazed bravery and anger. Miniatures wise, the World Eaters had a recent model release towards the end of 9th edition. Currently their model range is kind of small for unique stuff, but fairly nicely realised. We've got the foot troops of the Khorne Berserkers here on the bottom left, the possessed 8 bound on the bottom right, World Eaters bound with Bloodletter Demons to further heighten their aggression and strength as if it weren't enough already. Then at the back we've got Lord Invocators, Manstoner Juggernaut, a great demon engine in the Khorne Lord of Skulls, and Primarch Angron on the right here. The Red Angel can swoop into battle fast and destroy things very quickly, and has an unpleasant habit of coming back from being banished very quickly indeed, ready to carve a violent path through the galaxy once again. World Eater's gameplay tends to be fairly simple and to the point. They're usually all about sheer murderous melee damage, and to get there they can often scout up the board really quite quickly, with things like pre-game moves from 8 bound and Lord Invocators giving scouts to other things as well. Then maybe having a whole bunch of Berserkers and Rhinos on objectives, blood surging into the enemy, and of course Angron himself descending upon the foe like a meteor of rage, where if you don't destroy him he's going to break things quickly, and if you do then he's got a good chance to come back sometime later in the game. Their core rules are bonus damage on the charge, and the Blessings of Khorne, which allow you to roll some dice, asking for some blood-soaked boons from their Dark Master, either making them faster, tougher, or more dangerous in the fight. Currently at the moment they seem to be at least fairly well balanced. Win rates are around about 48% or so in game, so certainly seem to be strong enough to hold their own in the hands of a good player. Next up, we've got the dour and steadfast Iron Warriors, the 4th Legion of Space Marines, with their Primarch Perturabo being a genius of mechanisms and machines. Their legion is the expert siege warfare regiment, better than all others at laying low the fortifications of enemies, with a particular liking for besieging their hated foes, the Imperial Fists. Compared with much of the other Chaos Space Marine legions, they often tend to fight with heavy weapons, mechanical augmentations, and demon engines, plus plenty of fire support from their tanks and vehicles. They're an undivided legion, with slightly less god devotion than most. They perhaps seem to be getting on at least somewhat well with Vashtorr, who does seem to have some affinity with them. For unique miniatures, currently for 40k they don't have anything specific. They did used to have a previous Warsmith, though plenty of units do fit their trope quite well, maybe like the Warpsmith. Slight difference in name there, and most other things with firepower and armour, maybe Havocs, Predator tanks, that kind of thing. The Heresy range isn't really all that extensive either, to be honest. They get Terminator formations with a whole bunch of Cyclone missile launchers, plus some nice themed sculpted heads. I think they're a legion that could use a bit more of expanding of some themed options though. In Codex Chaos Space Marines, their themed attachment is the Fellhammer Siege Host. This one makes Chaos Space Marines extra tough, with a lot of -1 to wound for strong shooting targeting most of your units, plus a nice reactive stratagem for a 5+ feel no pain. Basically the Chaos Space Marines aren't going to die quite as fast with this on the go. Otherwise it's mainly about supporting ranged units a bit, though maybe in a slightly peripheral way, and most of the buffs are a bit situational in my opinion. I think they do at least a reasonable enough job of representing the army though. Armoured units with a bunch of heavy weapons that excel at destroying fortifications and vehicles does seem something that you could do there, and they can make some extra tanky Terminators as well with the Bastion plate. For their detachment, I'd rate it as probably kind of medium to weaker at the moment. I feel like it's going to be one of those ones that's actually genuinely quite strong in more casual games, as you do get a fair bit of value out of the toughness boosts, though maybe just isn't really quite a standout in more competitive games, as a lot of the boosts and things that it gives are just kind of passive and don't really give you quite as much scope for clever tricks beyond things on datasheets. I'd say it's usable enough though, definitely at a casual level can do well. Next up we've got the Chaos God worshipping Word Bearers. They're the 17th Legion of Space Marines and followers of their Primarch Lorgar. They were forbidden from worshipping the Emperor as a god by his own decree, so set out in search of entities worthy of their respect and deification, finding the Chaos Gods themselves, and are now fanatical prophets and evangelists of the ruinous powers. They're an undivided legion, worshipping them equally, though many individual Chaos Marines will get marks of one god or another, and in particular they have a great number of demonkin and possessed amongst their ranks, many choosing to make dark pacts to bind demons with their flesh for all sorts of unnatural gains and advantages. As with the Iron Warriors, they don't have specific miniatures for Warhammer 40K, though do have plenty from Heresy. I think a few of the core range do fit their sort of vibe quite well, particularly the Possessed, Master of Possession, and the Dark Apostle, preaching the true faith to the masses. Otherwise, from their Heresy range, they had the Praetor on the previous slide, plus a nice Terminator Praetor here, inlaid with the runes that they quite like to describe themselves with. There's also the sinister and twisted Gal Vorbak as well, early possessed word bearers from the Heresy. In-game in Codex Chaos Space Marines, it seems that the index detachment in the Pact-bound Zealots is the one that aims to be word bearers. I still argue that it's one of the coolest out of the detachments. Being able to mark your units for individual Chaos Gods is just really good fun, and then they gain some very nice benefits in terms of boosted Dark Packs in one way or the other, or access to some seriously powerful stratagems depending on their chosen deity. I have seen it be a talking point online already, though, that it just doesn't really reflect word bearers amazingly well. I think it would have been nice to see some good boost for things like Masters of Possession, the Possessed themselves, or the Dark Apostles. I think having it all very deity focused is well and good, but perhaps just feels like a bit more general purpose, Chaos Undivided, as opposed to Word Bearer specifically, despite the name. In any case, though, I'd rate that detachment as still being really quite strong, getting Dark Packs to get things like sustained hits on a 5+ for ranged units, and really powerful stratagems like hiding units, full wound rerolls for Undivided, and advance and charge for Slanesh all seem great. It was maybe a shame that Possessed got a bit nerfed between Index to Codex though, losing access to their devastating wounds quite as readily. Moving on, we've got the 15th Legion and the Legion of Tzeentch. The Thousand Sons are the arcane and sorceress descendants of Magnus the Red, and typically number amongst the greatest sorcerers and spellcasters in the galaxy. The Thousand Sons are a very psychically adept legion, shunned by the Emperor, and in their arcane meddling fell foul of progressively worsening mutations from Tzeentch, up to the point when Arabin enacted a great rubric, turning the non-sorcerous Thousand Sons into dust, sealing their armor, and dooming them to be basically no more than soulless automata, conducting the whims of their sorcerers. The Thousand Sons often make war to acquire forbidden lore and enact great rituals, things that will further the schemes of the Dark Gods and propel them to galactic greatness. They have a particular hatred for the Space Wolves due to the whole incident with them burning down their homeworld during the Horus Heresy. The Thousand Sons were the first deity-specific Chaos Legion to get a proper plastic miniature range, their Primarch Magnus being the first one to return to Warhammer 40K properly, and otherwise have a small range of fairly nicely executed plastic stuff, a good number of different interesting sorcerers with a sort of Egyptian kind of styling, and often having some avian themes thanks to the influence of Tzeentch. Otherwise here we've got a Mighty Scarab Occult Terminator, a raised rubric holding a Soul Reaper cannon, a standard Rubik Marine in the background holding a Warp Flamer, seriously scary to any sort of enemy horde army there, and accompanied into war by a great number of their Birdmen mortal acolytes, the Zangors often used in their schemes as cannon fodder, but they do have some disc-mounted elites within their ranks like this Shaman. In-game, the Thousand Sons get their full standalone support in their index, and will have a codex later in 10th edition. Typically with their kind of small unit range, they tend to operate with Rubik Marines being fairly centralized datasheets within the codex, backed up by a number of sorcerers, throwing a whole load of psychic damage around, maybe supported by some hordes and hangers-on, maybe a little bit of fire support in some armies. They maybe tend to be a little bit more range focused versus melee, both with psychic damage, plus their Inferno Bolters, combi weapons, and Warp Flamers. The Kabbalistic rituals really add a huge amount of strength to the Thousand Sons army. Their units generate Cabal points and can throw out big damage spells like Doom Bolt, removing enemy saves or making their units far faster, and their current Cult of Magic detachment helps out with boosting their psychic damage. Magnus tends to be a focal linchpin in optimized lists, lots of Kabbalistic rituals and stratagems focusing on him specifically. Overall, they're very strong and are shaping up to be one of 40K's stronger armies currently. I wouldn't be too surprised if they're topping a bunch of tournaments over the next few months. Next up, we have the clandestine and secretive Alpha Legion. The 20th Legion very appropriately have their Roman numeral as a double cross, as no one's really ever sure exactly what the Alpha Legion are up to. They had twin Primarchs in Alpharius and Omegon, both generally thought to be dead, but who really knows, they do seem to crop up remarkably commonly, with many Chaos Lords impersonating their guise. They remain a secretive legion with very unclear agenda, maintaining presences in plenty of places in the galaxy where you wouldn't expect them to turn up. The soldiers are masters of covert operations and fomenting uprising. When you think you've foiled one of their schemes, you find out that they actually had far more things going on. The Hydra truly has many heads. As another slightly less vocal non-deity legion from the Codex, they unfortunately don't have any major 40k miniature support, but do have a fair few interesting things for the Heresy. A really quite cool sniper assassin, saboteur specialist, and an interesting axe-wielding Terminator squad with some Volkites, all clad in their fairly signature look of metallic turquoise kind of paints. In Codex Chaos Space Marines, their themed detachment are the Deceptors. The main advantage of that is infiltrating a ton of cultists and legionaries into the midboard, so you can have them start on central objectives pre-game and potentially do some pretty devastating move blocks and annoying shenanigans if you go first. Infiltrating tons of stuff can be a bit of a double-edged sword though, as it also means that usually you've got loads of units that the enemy could damage very, very easily, so maybe can be a bit of a swing depending on who gets first turn. Otherwise, they do have a fair few interesting sneaky tricks and are able to do some shenanigans that many other factions can't. I do quite like their automatically trigger a deadly demise type roll, and perhaps classically they tend to be a bit more range focused versus melee, maybe employing a slightly disproportionate amount of cultists to enact their sneaky tricks. I would say that out of the gate, despite having interesting rules, the Deceptors probably look towards the medium to weaker side of 40k, though it will be interesting to see if people manage to make them work competitively or not. They should be fairly good at scoring some early points from their core rule, though you do have quite a lot based on the early game interactions, and are really quite dependent on legionaries and cultists being strong for the army to overall be strong. Still quite an interesting one though, and having lots of things start in the midboard could be really quite spooky to the opponent. Next up, we've got Mortarian's Nurgle-aligned legion in the Death Guard, the 14th Legion of Space Marines, and the Death Guard were typically dour and resolute warriors of attrition before, famed for being able to survive things no matter the odds, and this was cranked up to the next level when Nurgle blessed them during the Heresy in a warp plague in their ships becalmed within the warp, their warriors blighted with a myriad of diseases, but in reward for being transformed into the rocketing carcasses that are the Plague Marines, they're almost unkillable with conventional weapons, able to shrug off blows that should have laid any normal Space Marine low. They make war with great bounties from their patron deity, all sorts of disease and plagues and poison weapons, usually reaping a great tally on the population of any world they attack, far beyond anything that they do on the battlefield, such as the blight that they bestow on the enemies. With their own codex and having their miniature range which launched at the start of 8th edition in a big way against the Primaris Marines, Death Guard have more unique miniatures than any other legion in Warhammer 40k for Chaos. Several infantry squads, demon engines, and lots of characters including their Primarch. Here we have some Plague Marines for the rank and file, and some Death Shroud Terminator elites, hefting their terrifying Man Reapers, scything down the enemy's elites with ease. Otherwise, here are a couple of examples of their demon engines, the Plague Burst Crawler with its blighted mortar and entropy cannons to take chunks out of enemy armor, and the anti-elite and vehicle close-range specialists in the Mephitic Blight Haulers, lighter demon engines to move a bit faster up the board and hit the foe hard. With their standalone faction support in their index, they have more interesting rules than most. Their core rule are the contagions of Nurgle. They debuff enemies' toughness when they're nearby and an expanding aura as the game goes on. And you also get to choose a second debuff, whether it's -1 to hit or extra AP against the enemy forces. In general, getting close to them is bad news, and it can mean that they're maybe a bit better trying to get up in the enemy's faces and perhaps engage them at closer range. Otherwise, they get boosted toughness characteristics, often being T5 versus T4 on their standard Space Marines, lots of lethal hits to represent their diseased weapons, and generally tend to be a bit more slow and purposeful and more attrition warfare focused, even if I think they might be lacking something a bit more core for their durability to make them really tougher than most other legions, which they feel like they should be. In any case though, they have plenty of usable options within their index. Most of their unique units are good enough to hit the table, at least in casual games, and their win rate is pretty balanced versus the field, around about 48% or so. They certainly can be in the running in the competitive meta. Next up, we've got the Twisted and Sadistic Night Lords. The 8th Legion follow their warped justice of their Primarch Conrad Kurz, savage murderers that burst from the shadows, inflicting terror tactics upon their foe, doing horrifying things to those that they deem unworthy. including flaying the very flesh from their bones. They fight in lightning-wreathed armor with lots of bat-wing heraldry, though maybe in 40k tend to make war for more practical reasons than most, more often to acquire resources and gain power, and have a bit of a loose relationship with the Chaos Gods, much of the Legion having little interest in them as deities. The Night Lords have had a recent Kill Team upgrade set that I think did a very good job of turning the regular Legionary kit into something far more themed for the Legion. There's some pretty cool details that definitely make the squad feel a lot more Night Lords. Bat-winged helmets, lots of flayed skin, and all sorts of other little things. I do quite like the guy who's basically going for being a mini version of the Primarch himself. Plus they do have a bunch of other things from the Heresy as well, a few characters as you can see here, plus their own themed Raptor squad. I feel like if they could get round to releasing a themed upgrade kit like this for each Legion in 40k, plus maybe at least one named character or unique unit for them, then that would go a long way to making the Legions feel a bit more unique and different on the board. For the Night Lords, their themed detachment in Codex Chaos Space Marines are the Dread Talons. It does kind of continue in a long line of Night Lords rules being broadly revolving around leadership shenanigans, which usually tends to be kind of weak in Warhammer 40k. I do think that the Battle Shock debuff, which is kind of similar to Chaos Knights, is genuinely quite a good one, but perhaps the rest of the support is maybe a little bit too dependent on the enemy actually failing those leadership tests in the first place, which isn't really something that you can always rely on, and does mean that even to take effect for a lot of the rules you need to damage but not destroy units, which often isn't the best thing to wind up having done in a turn. I feel like it does have some interesting things, though probably isn't going to wind up being one of the stronger detachments out there. Classically beyond that though, they tend to use a lot of Raptors, which could be quite nice with that new jump pack lord that's coming out. They maybe tend to prefer a little bit more melee versus range, though do use both. Overall, I guess probably not going to be the strongest out of the Chaos Legions based on that detachment, though like the rest of the Legions they can use other ones if they want to. Those are the 9 core Chaos Legions, but there's plenty more besides that for different chaotic forces. Besides quite a long list of various different renegades and heretics, there's the followers of the sort of demon demigods, Be'lakor and Vashtorr, both kind of different and operate in their own way. Be'lakor is the Dark Master and the Demon Prince of Chaos Undivided, blessed by all 4 ruinous powers to the extent where he's a great power in his own right. His particular brand of shadow warpcraft has mortals and demons able to unnaturally sneak up on their enemies before vanishing once again. Be'lakor does get his own personal rules in Index Chaos Demons, though I suspect we might have to wait for the actual codex to come out, where I'd guess there might be some sort of ally mechanic to put some Space Marines back in his army, as he was able to field them before. I guess we'll wait and see on that front, though I suspect that there will be a good mix of both demons and marines, maybe with an allied knight or two thrown in as well. Otherwise, newly remade within the recent Chaos Codex is Vashtorr. He is the minor chaos deity of the Forge and Forbidden Technology, who has aspirations of joining the Great Pantheon and holds great power within the Warp, being the manufacturer of demon engines to supply the other deities for their great game, holding a lot of power and influence. He commands the demon world of Wormwood as a webway tunneling device and holds sway over a great number of demons and Chaos Space Marines that have joined his ranks, having been well supported by the War Master and the whole narrative around the Arcs of Omen. He's part of Codex Chaos Space Marines, his personal datasheet being basically that of a raised Demon Prince, a little bit tougher and a bit more dangerous with a Strength 14 big hitting hammer against vehicles and helping out nearby demon engines, adding one to their strength characteristics. I feel like his own datasheet is maybe a little bit passable unfortunately. That will depend on if they put points cost for it up or down. I do think that his themed attachment in the Soulforged War Pack is already quite nice though. That gives major power boosts to the demon engines that he can field. There are additional packs and contracts with Vashtorr allowing them to have yet more damage output, extra attacks in the fight phase, or +1 to wound when shooting, both of which are really quite massive when combined with the dark packs they can already get. There's some nice damage stratagems as well, plus a powerful reroll enhancement. I feel like if demon engines do get good, then this detachment will be a very strong one indeed. Finally, we get onto the Renegade Warbands, where I'll go through a few of the more notable ones. The Red Corsairs are perhaps some of the best known renegades in the galaxy, not hailing from original Chaos Legions, but being drawn from other chapters, the core of their force formerly being the Astral Claws chapter, underneath their chapter master Huron, now Huron Blackheart. They operate out of a renegade pirate fleet of Heretic Astartes, originally seceding from the Imperium due to corruption and fighting against the Inquisition. Then following that, most of these fell to chaos, operating out of the Maelstrom and raiding loyalist holdings, securing stocks of gene seed and war material, making them ever stronger. And recently Hurons also required an Ark of Omen from Vashtorr. They do have a miniature for Huron himself as well, though unfortunately it's out of print from Games Workshop. Interestingly, being one of the only characters that's made in fine cast resin but didn't get retired from the codex when his model went away does make me hopeful that he might have a plastic resculpt at some point in the future. I really wouldn't be too surprised if a new model for him crops up as part of a campaign series, maybe later in 10th edition, or maybe as a character release in a future Chaos Codex. In game, though, it seems to be a good time to be a Renegade Raider of the Red Corsairs right now. Their theme detachment allows them to move really quite fast and hit hard against things on objectives, favouring a sort of mobile warfare sort of thing, Marines jumping out of transports, fast moving bikers, and a focus on destroying the enemy and running off with the loot. The core rule's really quite nice, and they back that up with some very nice movement and damage boosts in the stratagem section beyond that as well. And I feel like between that, they're shaping up to be very strong, maybe one of the strongest Chaos Space Marine detachments from the core codex. I feel like Huron's datasheet itself is merely okay though, definitely usable and does come with some interesting redeploys baked in. If anything though, it seems like it could be better in the Deceptors detachment with redeploying some infiltrate type units, maybe more so than the Red Corsairs themed one. Overall, they're not being too bad as Renegades at the moment though. Otherwise for Renegades, there's some other big forces out there in the galaxy. The Fallen Dark Angels are a notable one, with their leader in the Lion's great rival Luther. The half of the Dark Angels Legion who turned their back on the Emperor being neglected on their homeworld of Caliban, and attempting to ambush their loyalist brothers in return, though it didn't really work out too well for them. The Chaos Deities scattered them through the space and time in the galaxy, and are gathering under the leadership of Luther himself, potentially building up to a final reckoning with the Dark Angels at some point, maybe seeming even more likely now Lionel Johnson has returned at large to the galaxy. For unique miniatures at the moment, they only have Cypher the Fallen Angel, an enigmatic individual who's both taken the side of loyalists or traitors as he saw fit before. And I would say at least a fairly strong and interesting datasheet. Lone operatives are generally fairly good to have around anyway, and he's actually got quite a lot of damage with his pistols now, as he can fire them both at range and in melee. I feel like they could quite credibly use a few of the detachments out there. Maybe for theming, some like the Deceptors or the Veterans could be good if you did want to create an army of fallen angels. Otherwise, there's also the creations of Bile, led by the renegade Emperor's Children apothecary that is Fabius Bile himself. He's long since cut ties with his old legion though, and is now going his own way as essentially a chaos scientist, roaming the galaxy and trying to create the ultimate space marines, experimenting on Primaris and using experimental technology to create hulking great big brutes of space marines that are stronger and tougher than most who would oppose them. He tends to make opportunistic allies and leads many warbands together, augmented by his dark science and the valuable gene craft that he can bring to the table, though always at a price. Mr. Bile himself, also known as the Clone Lord and the Spider, I think does have a pretty nice miniature. Already mad chaos scientist there with a whole load of disturbing surgical instruments, and I think he's a usable enough datasheet in game. Can hit quite hard against infantry in his own right and buffs the stats of the rest of things in his units. Maybe not a first choice compared with Chaos Lords for most in competitive play though. Again, there could be a fair few different options for how you might represent him. I feel like the Renegade Raiders detachment might not be the worst in the world for fast moving and hard hitting, scary mutant freaks, or maybe something like the Pack Bound with a whole focus on Undivided, just getting some big damage buffs out there. Otherwise though, there are many other renegade bands of Chaos Space Marines across the galaxy, some of greater or lesser fame. There's plenty of splinter forces from most of the major legions, plus various chapters that have fallen to chaos in their own way over the millennia since the heresy. Another four of the more well-known deity-specific ones are the Purge, followers of Nurgle, seeing all life as corrupt and make war to eradicate it, the Brazen Beasts, which have their mighty demon engines of Khorne, the Scourged, who had their eyes opened by Tzeentch to the falsehoods of the Imperium, and the Flawless Hosts, exemplary chapter known as the Shining Blades, now fallen to the temptations of Slaanesh. The Crimson Slaughter are quite well known as well, previously a chapter known by the Crimson Sabres, driven to madness by Khorne when they're fighting cultists. They had some focus in 40k 6th and 7th edition alongside the Dark Angels, with some cool miniatures including this Chaos Lord Cranon the Relentless. These guys have had some token rules in the past, though in general I just used one of the other detachment's rules for them. Quite a lot of options depending on exactly how you'd like to realise the army. I guess Brazen Beast could be kind of nice with the Vashtorr type one. In any case, there's a lot of different flavours of Chaos Space Marine out there. Let me know your thoughts, which one you chose, or which one you're thinking of going with and why. Look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. I'm sure I'll have more for the followers of the Dark Gods in the not too distant future. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep all these videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.